My name is Jack Weston. I'm 54 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I was the senior systems analyst at Orion Dynamics, a mid-sized tech firm headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. If you'd asked anyone who actually worked in the trenches, they'd tell you I was the backbone of the IT department. Not flashy, not loud, just always there, quietly, keeping everything running from the dial-up era to the cloud era. 17 years, 3 CEOs, hundreds of employees trained. I never asked for promotions, never played politics. I just solved problems, recovered lost databases, rebuilt collapsed servers over holiday weekends, stayed late when everyone else was home. And I never once raised my voice about it. So when Daniel Mercer, our new VP of Operations, called me into his office that Monday morning, Vanessa from HR already seated beside him, I knew what was coming before a single word left his mouth. Jack, after careful consideration, we're eliminating your position, effective immediately. I didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't plead. I nodded once. Understood. Then I stood, walked out, and returned to my desk. My hands moved automatically, unplugging the photo of my daughter Megan from her high school graduation, the chipped ceramic mug she made me in art class, the tiny cactus that somehow survived 17 years of fluorescent light. I packed each item into a box while younger employees stole nervous glances in my direction, their eyes darting away when I met their gaze. They didn't know what to say. Most of them I had trained myself. Bright kids, full of ideas, but none of them knew the depth of the infrastructure I had built. They worked on the surface, touching code and tools I had engineered over years. They didn't understand the old architecture. They didn't know the way the system's bones were fused together, not just with wires and code, but with careful intent. Bethany from marketing stopped by, visibly upset. Jack, this is crazy. You built this place. I gave her a small smile. Companies change direction, but with no warning. After everything you've done, it's fine, I said gently. It wasn't. But I wasn't about to make a scene. As I carried my box toward the elevators, I saw Daniel standing at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, watching me like a warden seeing off a prisoner. No handshake, no goodbye, just surveillance, making sure I left quietly. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. When I stepped out into the sunlight, I paused in the parking lot, looked back at the 12-story building where I'd spent almost half my adult life. My security badge had been renewed 16 times. I'd been with Orion back when we were just 2 floors in a rented space next to a sandwich shop. Back when my daughter was still in kindergarten. Now she was finishing graduate school. And I was being sent home like a piece of outdated hardware. I opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and stared at the dashboard for a long time. Then I started the engine and drove. They thought they'd discarded me. What they didn't realize was that I'd seen everything. And Wednesday was going to be fun. Back home, the silence hit harder than I expected. No buzzing phone, no urgent emails, no blinking servers demanding attention. Just stillness, broken only by the soft clink of the coffee mug Andrea set beside me on the desk. She didn't say anything. After 19 years of marriage, she knew when I needed space. She just placed the mug down, kissed the top of my head, and left for the grocery store. Once she was gone, I reached under the desk and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a small black flash drive. One of several, actually. I'd kept them there for years, labeled, encrypted, and disguised as old USB installs. Officially, I wasn't supposed to have them. Company policy prohibited off-site backups. But years ago, When the legal team asked me to design an internal auditing system for insider threats, I'd made the case for redundancy, signed paperwork, got approvals, and then they forgot. But I didn't. I plugged the drive in and opened the files. Years of documentation, logs, emails, system maps. Even things I technically shouldn't have had access to. But when you're the one who built the vault, you tend to keep spare keys. That's when I found it again. The anomaly I'd discovered 3 months earlier. Back then, I'd been running a routine scan through our financial software. A quiet task, one that most of the younger analysts had forgotten even existed. I noticed something odd. Regular payments to a vendor I didn't recognize, Apex Solutions Group. At first, the amounts were small, easy to overlook, but they'd grown, month by month, like a slow leak behind drywall. I'd flagged it, noted the transactions, and kept watching. Apex was registered just last year, with a business address that turned out to be nothing more than a UPS store mailbox in suburban Kansas. No website, no employees, just an entity collecting payments from Orion Dynamics. And now, with time on my hands and no distractions, I followed the trail deeper. What I found turned my stomach. Over the past 18 months, Apex Solutions had received nearly $1.8 million from Orion. The payments were categorized as software license renewals, perfectly legitimate on paper. But the license fees were inflated by 15%, sometimes 20%, just enough to pass casual audits. And the approval trail? Straight to Brian Ellsworth, our CFO. I kept digging, cross-referencing dates and access logs from archived system snapshots. 18 months ago, right when the first Apex payment was issued, Brian had personally requested expanded privileges on our internal approval software. That wasn't standard practice. The final piece clicked into place when I pulled the business registration record. Apex Solutions was owned by a man named Thomas Ellsworth, Brian's brother-in-law. That was it. That was the scheme. Fake vendor. Real payments. Inflated invoices for legitimate services. Funnel the difference into a shell company. Quiet. Elegant. Hidden in plain sight. And they needed me out before anyone connected the dots. That's why I'd been slowly pushed aside. My access downgraded, my name removed from meeting invites, projects reassigned to less experienced staff. Jason Phillips, the so-called consultant Daniel had brought in 6 months ago, wasn't there to modernize anything. He was there to replace me, to eliminate the one person who knew where everything lived, the one person who kept watching. My phone buzzed. A text from Steven, one of the junior analysts I'd mentored. Sorry about yesterday. Total BS what they did. Phillips is already in your old office. I stared at the screen, then set the phone down. This wasn't about bitterness. It was about precision. If I came at them like a bitter ex-employee, they'd spin it. Label it sour grapes. A desperate cry from someone past his prime. Number I needed to be smarter, sharper. I didn't want my job back. I wanted the rot cut out from the root, and I knew exactly where to start. Tuesday morning broke overcast, but inside, I felt clearer than I had in weeks. I sat in my home office, staring at the laptop screen, the Apex trail still fresh in my mind. The fraud was real. The evidence was solid. And the connections were damning. But the most dangerous thing I had wasn't the data. It was what they assumed I didn't have. They thought I'd vanish quietly, that I'd nurse my wounds and disappear into irrelevance. That was their first mistake. I opened my email and began to type. My first instinct was to send everything to the board of directors. A full report, all the documentation, every invoice, every timestamp, every connection that tied Brian Ellsworth and Daniel Mercer to Apex Solutions. But then I paused. It was too clean, too obvious. It would be easy for them to brush it off as the ramblings of a disgruntled former employee. A man clinging to relevance with half-baked accusations. I deleted the draft and leaned back, thinking. What I needed was leverage. Not a bombshell, but a spark. Something small enough to rattle them. Something that would reveal their guilt through their reactions. That's when I remembered the old burner email I'd created years ago for phishing simulations. One that mimicked an internal domain, but didn't show up in company directories. I opened it, typed a new message, and addressed it directly to Daniel Mercer. Subject line: Financial irregularities. Urgent review. Needed in the body, I laid out a basic outline of the Apex payments. No conclusions, no accusations, just enough to show I had seen behind the curtain. I left out the family connection, the inflated percentages, and the shell company registration. I just described the pattern, the vendor, and the timeline. If Daniel was involved, he'd panic. If he wasn't, he'd start asking questions. Either way, I'd learn something. I hit send. Then I waited. Exactly 27 minutes later, my phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Jack, I received an email this morning from you, or someone pretending to be you, about some financial issues. We really need to talk. Call me back as soon as you can. I didn't. At 10:30 a.m., another email landed, this time from Vanessa in HR. Mr. Weston, we've received concerning communication from you that potentially violates your separation agreement. Please cease all contact with Orion Dynamics employees. Any further outreach may result in legal action. I smiled. Classic corporate maneuver. Threaten, isolate, intimidate. But here's the thing. I hadn't signed any separation agreement. They hadn't even offered one. They were bluffing, scrambling, and I was just getting started. That afternoon, I drove across town to my bank and accessed my safe deposit box. Inside was another flash drive, an older one. This backup held files I hadn't touched in years, the original design documents from when I'd first created our internal security protocols. Included in those records was a full list of every access level and every change ever made. According to the logs, 18 months ago, Brian had submitted a direct request for elevated financial privileges. No proxies, no delegation, just his name, date stamped and confirmed by server signatures, right when the Apex scheme began. When I returned home, my inbox was full. 3 missed calls from Daniel, 2 voicemails from Vanessa, and 1 new name in the mix, Jason Phillips. So he was getting involved now too. Interesting. That evening, I got a message from Steven, marked urgent. Jack, they're freaking out. Saying you sent some email about financial fraud. Phillips called an emergency meeting. They're trying to lock you out of everything, even historical access logs. What's going on? I replied with just one line. Don't get involved, Stephen. Just watch. At 3:12 p.m., my landline rang. I hadn't used that number for work in years. Jack, a voice said, calm and rehearsed. It's Brian Ellsworth. We need to talk. I didn't say anything. I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding, he continued. If you have concerns, let's address them through the proper channels. The board, perhaps. There's no need to escalate. No need? I asked finally. These transitions are difficult. I understand that. but we can work something out. Severance, a glowing reference, whatever you need. I already had what I needed, Brian, I said. You took it. Now I'm just making sure the right people understand why. Silence on the line. Then, with a sharp breath, you're making a serious mistake. No, I said. You did. You just didn't expect the guy in the corner to be watching. I hung up. 10 minutes later, an email from Vanessa arrived, this time with a revised severance offer attached, double the original amount, along with a confidentiality clause. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about hush money. This was about accountability. And I hadn't even played my best hand yet. Wednesday morning. Gray skies above downtown St. Louis. I parked across the street from Orion Dynamics' towering glass building and watched the steady flow of employees disappear behind its revolving doors. In the passenger seat beside me sat my laptop, already connected to a Wi-Fi hotspot. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The screen opened to the burner email account I'd set up years ago. It wasn't traceable through company directories, but it looked internal. That would buy me just enough credibility. And just enough chaos. At exactly 9:15 a.m., I sent the first volley. The email subject line read, Apex Payments, financial review required immediately. Inside, I outlined the suspicious vendor transfers. Just enough technical and financial detail to rattle anyone who knew what they were looking at, but nothing that revealed my endgame. No mention of Brian's brother-in-law. No accusation. Just a breadcrumb trail. The goal wasn't to burn it all down, not yet. It was to make them run. By 9:45, my phone rang. Daniel again. I let it go to voicemail. Jack, I don't know what you think you're doing, but we need to talk. You can't just throw around financial allegations. Call me back immediately. I closed the screen, sipped my coffee, and waited. At 10:23, an email from Vanessa arrived, formal and sharp. Mr. Weston, further attempts to communicate with Orion personnel will be interpreted as a violation of your confidentiality obligations. You are hereby instructed to cease contact and refrain from disseminating company information. Legal action is being considered. So now, they were leaning harder into legal threats. But they didn't know the truth. I hadn't signed any separation agreement. I owed them nothing. At noon, I made my next move. I drove across town to the bank again. This time to retrieve the original project logs I'd never stored digitally. Inside the folder was documentation of every systems audit I'd run over the past decade. I flipped through them until I found the one dated 18 months ago, the day the Apex transfers started. There it was, in black and white. A request logged from Brian Ellsworth to gain elevated access to the company's financial authorization systems. The change had been approved internally, under Daniel's oversight, bypassing standard multi-signer protocol. It shouldn't have been possible. But Daniel had restructured the approval chain 6 weeks earlier, citing efficiency optimization. They'd built the tunnel and started siphoning money in the same quarter. When I got home, I found 3 more missed calls. Daniel, Vanessa, and now Jason Phillips. His name surprised me. Jason had always played the polished outsider. Expensive suits, Harvard pedigree, all charm and ambiguity. He was hired as a consultant, but now he was inserting himself into the cleanup. That told me something. He wasn't just a bystander. He had skin in this. My inbox dinged again. Another message from Steven. They're freaking out. Phillips pulled everyone into a meeting. HR is in full lockdown mode. They're scrubbing access logs and running diagnostics on everything you ever touched. What did you do? I replied with a single sentence. Keep your head down, Stephen. You're about to learn who's really in charge. At 3:07 p.m., my landline rang again. This time, I picked up. Jack, the voice said, flat, even. It's Brian. Surprised you're still using company lines, I said. We need to be adults about this. I didn't respond. He continued. Let's meet. You've got concerns? Fine. Let's clear them up. Face to face. No lawyers. No boardroom posturing. I'm not interested in clearing anything up, Brian. Silence. I think the board might actually be very interested in Apex Solutions Group, I added, and your brother-in-law. There was a long pause, then a sharp inhale. You don't want to go down this road. Oh, I'm already on it. We can settle this. Generous severance. NDA. We can put this behind us. I hung up. 5 minutes later, an email from HR landed with a new severance package, triple the previous offer. With it, a thick legal document filled with clauses about non-disclosure, non-disparagement, and binding arbitration. They were panicking now, but I wasn't done. That night, I sat in my darkened office, surrounded by paper trails and encrypted files, and assembled everything into one airtight report. Timestamps, financial records, shell company registrations, access log edits, internal memos, and procurement bypasses. I bundled it all onto a flash drive. And then I picked up my phone and called the one person who might actually listen. I hadn't spoken to Robert Crane in over 6 years, but I knew he was still on the board. Semi-retired now. A quiet presence during quarterly meetings. Never flashy, never loud. But I remembered something most people didn't. He asked questions. Back when I'd built Orion's internal compliance framework, Robert had been the only board member who actually read the full reports. Not the summaries, the full ones. He'd catch things, follow up, ask about discrepancies that no one else noticed. So when he picked up on the second ring, it felt like fate meeting preparation. Jack Weston, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Long time. I heard they let you go. Not exactly. They eliminated my position. A beat. Then his voice shifted, became more deliberate. And now you're calling. This isn't about getting my job back, Robert, I said. I need 15 minutes of your time, in person. He didn't hesitate. Where? We met an hour later at a public park 3 miles from Orion's headquarters. I wore a gray windbreaker and a baseball cap. Just another guy taking a walk. Robert sat on a bench under a maple tree, his silver hair rustling slightly in the breeze. I handed him a sealed envelope and a flash drive. That's everything, I said. Dates, amounts, access logs, names, connections. It's not a theory. It's proof. He didn't open it, just held it in his lap and looked at me. And what do you want? Nothing, I replied. Not money, not reinstatement. I just want the right people to know. Do with it what you think is just. He studied me for a long moment. This about why Brian and Daniel looked like ghosts at yesterday's board meeting? Probably. Robert let out a dry chuckle. Always figured you knew where the bodies were buried. I buried the systems, Robert. I know where the cracks are. He nodded. There's an emergency finance session tomorrow. Convenient timing. I'm counting on it. When I stood to leave, he said, Jack, why me? I looked out at the skyline. Because you still believe in accountability. He gave a slight nod, then tucked the envelope into his leather briefcase. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Andrea. A guy named Jason Phillips just came by the house. Said it was urgent. I told him you weren't home. I stopped in my tracks. They were reaching now, crossing lines. Good. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Two competing tech firms reached out to me through LinkedIn, one based in Chicago, the other in Denver. Both had heard I was suddenly available. Both offered executive level roles, substantial signing bonuses, full relocation packages. Word was spreading. They didn't know what I was up to, but they knew why I'd been let go. And in this industry, quiet competence that brings down powerful people has a strange way of becoming very attractive. I didn't respond. Not yet. That evening, I sat with Andrea on our back porch as the sun dipped below the rooftops. She didn't ask what I was working on. She just sat beside me, our fingers interlocked. You ever think, she said after a while, that maybe the reason you saw all this is because you were meant to stop it? I looked over at her. I don't know about fate, but I do know when a system's about to fail. She squeezed my hand gently. Then fix it. Later that night, I logged into Orion's network one last time. Jason's team had tried to revoke my credentials, but they'd missed something. The security infrastructure I'd built had a fallback layer, an emergency access protocol only I knew about, buried 3 levels deep in the core, meant for cyber attacks or betrayals. I used it to schedule a timed email, one message, to every member of the board. Delivery, 8 a.m. sharp, Friday. Subject, before you approve. Q2 bonuses, read this. Attached, the full report, all 88 pages. Then I logged out, and I waited. Friday morning came calm and golden, the kind of fall morning that makes you think things are still okay in the world. I sat on my front porch with a steaming cup of coffee and watched the neighborhood wake up. Joggers passed. School buses hissed to a stop. Somewhere down the street, someone was mowing their lawn too early. But my mind wasn't on suburbia. It was 7:59 a.m. I refreshed my inbox once, then again. At exactly 8 o'clock, the email launched. The report I'd compiled, nearly 90 pages long, hit the inboxes of every board member at Orion Dynamics. It carried timestamps, IP logs, vendor addresses, invoice trails, shell corporations, backdoor system access, and internal emails, implicating both Brian Ellsworth and Daniel Mercer. By 8:17 a.m., my phone began to ring. Unknown numbers. No voicemails. No texts. They were scrambling. I ignored them all. At 9 a.m., the Emergency Finance Committee meeting convened in the executive boardroom. 10th floor, west side. Robert Crane would be sitting there, envelope in hand, watching as the rest of the board opened their laptops and read my email in real time. At 9:32, a text from Stephen lit up my phone. Police just arrived. Brian and Daniel pulled into separate rooms. Jason looks pale. What did you do? I didn't answer. The wheels were already turning. By 10:02 a.m., I received a call from Patricia Graves, Orion's general counsel. Unlike the others, I picked this one up. Mr. Weston, this is Patricia Graves from legal. The board would like you to come in, immediately, to discuss the information you provided. I'm available by phone, I replied calmly. This really should be handled in person. No, I said. Everything I know is already in that report. Everything I have is secured off-site in multiple encrypted locations. If anything happens to me or my family, additional copies will be sent to the SEC, the IRS, and 3 national outlets. Silence. Then, Mr. Weston, the board is taking this very seriously. Several executives have already been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Your cooperation moving forward is important. I have cooperated completely. My part is done. I hung up. That afternoon, I drove out to a diner about 20 miles outside the city, a quiet, unremarkable place where I knew I wouldn't be followed. Over lunch, the first stories broke on local business news sites. Orion Dynamics under internal investigation for financial misconduct. No names yet, just anonymous sources and boardroom whispers. But I knew how fast this would move. Once the forensic accountants got involved, once subpoenas started flying, the names would come out, and reputations would fall. At 2:11 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Robert. "It's a bloodbath," he said, not even bothering with hello. I sipped my coffee. "That bad?" Brian cracked. Confessed the Apex scheme the second we confronted him with the evidence. Tried to blame Daniel. Said he was pressured, that it was all department-driven. Daniel's denying everything. Jason claims he didn't know a thing, that he was just a consultant. And the board? Not buying any of it. We've suspended all three. Full audit underway. Forensic team says it's likely more than $4.5 million diverted over 3 years. I was close then. You were dead on. The report you sent? One of the most comprehensive internal takedowns I've ever seen. I didn't say anything. Robert continued. The board wants to speak to you. Not just about what happened, but about coming back. Not to your old job. A new one. Go on. They're creating a Chief Information Security Officer role. You'd report directly to the board, full executive privileges. I leaned back in the booth and stared out the window. It was what I'd hoped for, but not expected. I'll think about it, I said finally. Robert paused. You planned this, didn't you? No, I said. I planned systems. I planned safety nets. Everything after they fired me, that was just me, following protocol. I ended the call. That night, I sat down with Andrea and told her everything, from the first Apex payment I flagged to the final email blast. She listened quietly, then asked me a single question. What do you want to do now? I stared at my hands. Calluses from years of keyboards, scars from server racks, a career lived in the wires and shadows. I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. The system had been compromised. And this time, I was going to be the one watching. Monday morning, I walked into Orion Dynamics lobby, wearing a suit I hadn't needed in nearly a decade. The security guard, Tony, I think, did a double take. Then he straightened, nodded, and printed me a visitor badge. Welcome back, Mr. Weston Funny. How quickly respect returns when power shifts. The elevator ride to the 10th floor, the executive floor, was quiet. I'd never had reason to come up here before. My world had always been in the server rooms, the data tunnels, the code no one else saw. But today, I wasn't there to fix a network outage. I was there to rewrite the rules. The boardroom was all glass and polished oak, the saint. Lewis skyline stretching behind it like a painted backdrop. 10 board members sat around the table. Most I recognized. Some I didn't. Robert gave a slight nod as I entered. The interim CEO, a former COO named Helen Monroe, cleared her throat as I sat. Mr. Weston, she began, thank you for coming. What you've uncovered, the scale of it is beyond what we initially feared. The forensic team believes the embezzlement may exceed $5 million. I didn't respond. She continued. Brian Ellsworth has agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentencing. Daniel Mercer is contesting the allegations, but the board has voted unanimously to suspend all three implicated individuals. She shifted in her seat. We want to offer you the newly created role of Chief Information Security Officer, full executive status, reporting directly to the board, oversight across all departments. I reached into my briefcase and placed a slim folder on the table. My conditions? I said. She opened it and skimmed the contents. Her brow furrowed, then lifted. Her eyes paused at one line. Full audit authority, independent budget, veto power over all technology-related financial approvals. I nodded once. No more shadows. No more back doors? This happens again. It won't be because someone wasn't watching. This level of autonomy is highly unusual, she said. So was siphoning $5.2 million through fake vendors, I replied. Silence fell over the room. Robert cleared his throat. Jake's earned the right to set the terms, and frankly, after what we've just gone through, we'd be foolish to say no. The room stayed quiet for several more seconds. Then Helen spoke again. You have until noon to decide. We're prepared to honor the offer in full if you agree. I stood, picked up my folder, and turned to leave. At the door, Robert called out, Did you plan this all along, Jake? I stopped. Not out of drama, but honesty. I didn't plan to be fired after 17 years, I said. Everything after that was just me doing what I've always done, identifying system vulnerabilities and implementing appropriate security measures. I left the room without waiting for a response. At 11:47, my phone rang. They accepted every condition. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, corner view, floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the city I once watched from a parking lot. My name was now on the internal org chart at the very top of the security structure. And for the first time in my career, I didn't have to ask permission to do the right thing. Brian Ellsworth had pled guilty. With his cooperation, most of the funds had been recovered. He'd served time, less than he deserved, but more than most people like him ever faced. Daniel Mercer was fighting the charges, claiming ignorance, but the evidence spoke louder. The digital trails he left behind were careless, and prosecutors were patient. Jason Phillips had fled, packed up and vanished within 48 hours of the board meeting. Last I heard, he was in Sao Paulo. A federal extradition request was in progress. Orion Dynamics survived. Barely. And now it was my job to ensure it never got that close to collapse again. My old team reported directly to me now. I'd promoted Stephen to oversee day-to-day operations. The kid had a spark. He just needed someone who saw it. One afternoon, Andrea showed up at the office. She smiled from the doorway, holding her purse. "Lunch?" she asked. I grabbed my jacket and nodded. As we walked through the department, conversations quieted, not from fear, but from respect. They all knew what had happened. They knew who could have burned it all down and chose to rebuild instead. In the elevator, Andrea looked up at me and asked, "Happy?" I thought about it. The fury that fueled those first few weeks had long since cooled. What was left wasn't happiness exactly, but clarity, control, peace. "I'm good," I said. Outside, the October sun warmed our faces as we strolled toward the cafe down the block. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Security budget approved. Unanimous." I smiled. No arguments, no resistance, just trust. Andrea glanced at me. "What is it?" "Nothing," I said, sliding the phone into my pocket. "Just thinking about bridges." "Bridges? Some collapse under their own weight," I said. Others, if rebuilt right, become stronger than they ever were before. And this time, I'd built it right. 6 months into my new role, I found myself in unfamiliar territory, not because I didn't know the systems, but because I was finally sitting above them, watching, guiding, protecting from a place I never thought I'd reach. The title on my door now read Chief Information Security Officer, and with it came a clarity I'd never had during those long years in the server rooms. I was no longer just patching leaks. I was building a firewall around the soul of the company itself. But progress has its own shadows. One Thursday morning, I received an internal flag, one of the silent triggers I designed years ago, now tied into every department's network activity. It wasn't anything criminal, just curious. A junior executive in procurement had submitted a request for a new vendor contract, routine software support, but the vendor address seemed off. It was nothing like Apex or Lakeside, but it reminded me of how it starts. A shell name, an email trail with too few questions, a manager who signs off too quickly. I didn't raise alarms. I didn't forward it to legal. I walked down 2 flights of stairs, past the marketing floor, and into procurement. I knocked gently on the junior executive's cubicle. "Hi, I'm Jack. You submitted a vendor contract this morning?" Her eyes widened. She was maybe 28, nervous. "Yes, sir. I mean, yes, I did. Is there a problem?" "Not necessarily. I just wanted to make sure you understood who the vendor was. How did you find them?" She pulled up the details, rattling off buzzwords from a promotional email she'd received. Nothing illegal, just careless. "I'd suggest we slow this one down," I said, voice even. "Do a deeper check. Verify more than just the website." She nodded quickly. As I walked back to my office, I realized this was what oversight really looked like. Not surveillance, not suspicion. Presence. The simple act of showing up before things spiral. Later that afternoon, I stood by the 10th floor window, looking down at the streets I used to walk after those endless nights in the server room. Back then, I thought loyalty would protect me, that if I worked hard, stayed quiet, and did things right, someone would notice. No one did, until I made them. And even now, standing in this polished office with authority I once couldn't imagine, I understood something most people never learn. Power doesn't corrupt. Neglect does. When no one's watching, people cut corners. They start thinking no one will ever notice. That's how the fraud at Orion started. Not with greed, but with the assumption that no one would ever ask the second question. But now someone always asks the second question. Stephen poked his head into my office before the day ended. "Hey, Jack, got a minute?" "Sure." He stepped in, holding a folder. "We've been running the new system audit protocol you wrote. Flagged a couple of weird inconsistencies. Nothing serious yet, but I thought you'd want to take a look." I took the folder and gave him a small nod. "Good instincts." His eyes lit up a little. He left, and I sat down, flipping through the logs. The kid was sharp. I saw in him a version of myself, just younger, untested. But this time, he wasn't going to get pushed aside. He was going to be seen. That night, as Andrea and I sat at home watching the news, another story about corporate corruption flashed across the screen. Different company, different city, but the same story beneath. Executives stealing quietly, teams too afraid or too tired to speak up. Andrea looked over. "You ever wish you'd just taken their offer and walked away?" I thought about it. The hush money. The NDA. The easy exit. "No," I said softly. "I'd have been walking away from myself." She reached out and took my hand. "Then you did the right thing." I stared out the window as the evening deepened. Streetlights flickered on. A quiet hum of life filled the neighborhood, and in that moment, I knew. The storm had passed, but I would always be the one watching the horizon. 17 years of loyalty taught me how to keep things running. 1 year of betrayal taught me why they sometimes fall apart. What I learned through this experience wasn't just about corporate fraud or how quickly power can be misused. It was about value, not the kind that's listed in annual reports or measured in stock options, but the kind that gets overlooked every day. Quiet competence, invisible integrity, and the people who show up without being asked. For years, I believed that doing good work would be enough. That consistency and humility were virtues in themselves. And maybe they are. But when the people above you stop looking, stop caring, stop noticing, those virtues turn into vulnerabilities. The moment I was fired, something shifted in me, not out of vengeance, not even out of anger, but out of clarity. I realized that systems, whether technical or human, only stay secure when someone is watching. And when no one else was, I watched. What I did wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility. They thought they were firing a technician. What they fired was their failsafe. So what did I learn? That silence isn't always compliance. That loyalty without recognition becomes erosion. And that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who sees everything and says nothing until the time is right. And when that time comes, they won't even hear you coming. They'll only feel the fallout and wonder how they didn't see it sooner.